elc128 worksheet 22. What is a one shot? One shot, one scan. It's an instruction that is only true for one scan cycle. Some of your outputs can be one-shotted because once you turn them on, unless you are specifically turning them off somewhere else, they'll stay on. Generally, though, a one-shot refers to a rung only being true for one scan. When is the term rising or falling? Boy, that sentence needs work. When is the term rising or falling used with a one-shot? It has to do with the condition. You can set them up, generally speaking, so on a false to true transition, they're true for one cycle, that would be rising, or from a true to false transition, they are true. That would be that would be the falling one-shot. How can it be used in a subroutine program to keep unwanted outputs from being on? As good as subroutines are, as helpful as they are, the problem you will run into, and I'm trying to warn you of, is if you have two subroutines. And in subroutine 1, let's say, you turn on output bits 3, 4, and 5. So you're jumping to that subroutine, you're controlling outputs 3, 4, 5. Well, now you're no longer jumping to that subroutine because in your main ladder, your logic is set up to jump to the second subroutine. If that second subroutine does not in some way control output bits 3, 4, and 5, then they will stay on if they were put on from the first subroutine. Nothing will ever write them off. And the first time you see that happen, you're going to scratch your head and say, well, why is that working? Well, the PLC will do what you tell it. So if you tell it to scan a subroutine and you tell it to turn on outputs, it will turn on the outputs. And then if you never go back to that subroutine, it will never turn off the outputs if your logic to turn off the outputs is in that subroutine. So one of the things you have to do and how one-shots tie in is generally at the start of a subroutine you will have an instruction or a rung that is a one-shot, and it can be just whenever the subroutine is first scanned. That would be a false to true transition. Whenever that subroutine is first scanned, and I mean the first time it is scanned. So you jump to it. You haven't been going there, now you jump to it for the first time. That first rung with a one-shot will be true one time. If your program's going around and coming back to that subroutine every time, it will not repeat. It will only be true that one time. So what you often have to do is put in a one-shot in your subroutine to turn off any unwanted outputs. And as a general rule of thumb, you can copy a 0 or an off condition to all your outputs the first time you go into a subroutine. And that's a good thing to get in the habit of doing, because if one subroutine controls output 3, 4, 5, and another one controls outputs 1 and 2 and 6, and then 3, 4, 5, it's like you lost control of them when you go to the 1, 2, 6 routine. And you don't have control 3, 4, 5 till you go back to the 3, 4, 5 routine. And it's just seems like it's I mean, sometimes that won't hurt anything, but it seems like it's just a bad practice. So subroutines are very helpful, and that's one of the questions in question 11. How are they helpful, and why is it helpful to the PLC? But there is that issue that they have to be constantly scanned in order to do constant control. And if you're going to constantly scan it, do you really need it as a subroutine? Because then everything could be in a main ladder. Now, if you've got yours set up to a jump to subroutine and you have no conditions on it, in which case you're always going to that subroutine, then you don't need to write off outputs, because it just becomes part of your, it just breaks up your main ladder, if you will. So, and that would be just a line to a jump to a subroutine with no logical input conditions. That means that subroutine will get scanned every cycle, in which case your inputs and outputs controlled in that subroutine, or your outputs controlled in that subroutine, will always be executed. Okay? Now, I'm sure I thoroughly confused you. Now let's program. Main ladder with logic to a manual subroutine. So basically, I want my start stop. So when the cycle's on, I want it to go to an automatic subroutine. When the cycle's off, I want it to go to a manual routine. And in manual, the switches control the lights. At least 3 lights are switch controlled. So when you're in manual, if you make a switch, the light comes on. If you make another switch, a different light comes on. If you make a third switch, another light comes on. Then, if you push your start button and start your cycle, you want to go to automatic, in which case your lights now are coming on and sweeping in some fashion, so that you can do it like a timer on a stoplight, where you got 3 lights and each one's on for 2 seconds. Do it any way you want to do. You have seen plenty of options. Okay? Now, when you switch between subroutines, anything that was on should go off. So you're going to have to figure out how to put in some one shot in order to turn off any existing on outputs. Sorry. And then 11, why is the use of subroutines helpful to troubleshooter? I think you can probably figure that one out. Why is it helpful to PLC? Think in terms of scan time, and what might be helpful if you're not going to every subroutine in terms of scan time. 13, what happens if a motor forward and motor reverse were able to be energized simultaneously? So what happens if you energize motor forward and motor reverse simultaneously? You should always put in interlocks where you cannot do that. Okay. The other thing about one-shots that will be confusing to you is, can you see them? When you switch on your program and you monitor your program and everything turns blue, what you need to realize is there's enough delay there that if you have a one-shot instruction, you will never see it in the true condition. But it will happen. And that's across every platform I've ever seen. So if you see a one-shot instruction, whether it's click, Allen Bradley, or whatever, you can assume it worked. You'll never see it true, though, when you're monitoring your program. So don't come to me and say, hey, I've got this one-shot in my program, but it doesn't work. Well, yeah, it is. It's just not showing you that. Okay, if you didn't have a one-shot instruction with your PLC platform, how could you create one with standard logic? Basically, you've got your input that you only want to make something true, and you've got a storage bit, like a coil, a C bit, and you want to set it up so there's a condition that will only be true for one scan cycle. It's not a bad thing to look up. A lot of your programming shortcuts that you now have in PLCs were logic that somebody used enough that they made a function out of it. And so now you've got that function. But if you drill down in the function, you can replicate a one-shot. And You can Google it if you'd like to. Years ago, I used a book by Frank Petrozzella, and it was Alan Bradley based. And he had that in his ladder, and that's where this question came from. Sort of like the timer timing bits in Alan Bradley. Can you do them in click? Yes, but it's not as straightforward. There's not been a function created. You can do the same logic, and so the more you understand what's happening and how you can do it, great. I think you're a better programmer. But certainly use the tools. If you got them, use the tools. Now, I will say that, and then in a couple worksheets from now, I will tell you don't use the tools. Because I really want you to think about something. Anyway, that is a pretty good discussion on worksheet 22. And we're getting on toward the end, and y'all are getting much better. Some of the programs I'm seeing look very good, and I thank you for your efforts. Have a great day.